I have worked in this building for 34 years, and I have watched people look for things they cannot name. They come in carrying something heavy, and they go to the shelves as though the right spine, the right title in the right font, finally put it down for them. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time they check out 3 books and go home with the same weight they came in with, only now it has a receipt tucked inside it. I say this not to be unkind about books. I love books. I have given my life to them. Freaks, I say it because it is the only way I know to explain what happened one Tuesday afternoon in late November in the reading room of the Caldwell Public Library when an 11-year-old girl sat down at a piano nobody had touched in 6 years and said the thing that none of us, not me, not the dozen people scattered at the tables, not the woman in the back corner who had not cried in 8 months, had been able to say. Her name was Isla. I knew her the way you know the regulars, not well, but by sight and by habit. She had been coming in every week since the previous March, always alone, always on a Tuesday, always heading for the same chair by the tall window. A slight girl, dark-haired, with the careful, self-contained manner of a child who has recently been asked to be very grown-up about something. She checked out novels, mostly, sometimes poetry. She never asked for recommendations, and I never offered them. We had reached, without discussing it, a mutual understanding that she wanted the library to be quiet around her. I did not know, until later, that her father had died in February. The piano stands in the corner of the reading room the way forgotten things do, with a kind of apologetic dignity. It is a Broadwood upright, dark walnut, slightly out of the main traffic, and it had not been played since the spring of the year before last, when one of our retired volunteers used to come in on Thursday mornings and run through old songs nobody requested. When he moved away, the piano stayed. I had thought, from time to time, about having it removed. The lid was never lifted. I had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing a coat hook that has been in the same spot for a decade. That Tuesday, Isla did not go to the window chair. She came in as usual through the side entrance, and she stopped in the middle of the room and looked at the piano for a long moment, in a way that made me look up from the returns desk. Then she walked over to it, set her bag down on the floor beside the bench, and lifted the lid. I will tell you honestly, first thought was a practical one. The piano had not been tuned since the previous year. I was already calculating whether I should say something quietly, ask her to keep the volume low, perhaps explain that this was, strictly speaking, quiet space. I did not say anything. I am glad every day since that I did not say anything. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, not arranging herself, not warming up. Just sitting there the way you sit, before you say something you have rehearsed too many times. Then she placed her hands on the keys. The first thing she played was soft, not tentative, deliberate. It was the opening of a Chopin nocturne, the one in E-flat, and she played it with a steadiness that had no business being in an 11-year-old's hands. The reading room didn't react. People kept their eyes down. But there was a slight change in the quality of the silence, the way a room changes when a window is opened somewhere. You don't see the change, you feel the air shift. She played it through once quietly, and then she stopped. Not because she had finished. She had arrived somewhere and needed to decide what to do next. What she did next was something I have no adequate word for. She began again, and this time she took the nocturne apart. Not carelessly, but the way a careful person disassembles something in order to understand it, laying the pieces out where they can be seen. The left hand kept its slow, rolling pattern, steady as breathing, steady as something you can count on. Over it, the right hand began to do something that was no longer quite Chopin and was not yet anything else. It was something that lived between, something searching and circling, and every few bars it found its way back to the original melody, the way you keep touching a sore place to make sure. It is still there. I was on my feet without being aware of standing up. Around the room, things were happening slowly, the way frost forms. A man near the periodicals turned a page, and then did not turn another. A young woman at one of the stud-tables lifted her head and held it there, pen still. A boy of about 7, who had been kneeling on a chair looking at a picture book, knelt up straighter and went very still in the alert, animal way children do when they sense something real is occurring. The piece was building, not loudly but deeply, the way a well builds, going down rather than up. The melody in the right hand had become something plaintive and reaching, each phrase climbing a little, falling a little further, never quite landing. Under it, the left hand's rolling thirds were no longer just an accompaniment. They had become something patient, something that waited without impatience, the way certain people wait, with the whole of themselves, without looking at the door. Together they made a sound that was, I realized with a start, the sound of trying to speak to someone who is no longer there, and finding that the still come, even so, even knowing they will not be answered. I know I am an old librarian and not a music critic. I am telling you what I heard. At the back of the reading room, near the biography shelves, a woman was sitting at one of the Carol desks, with a closed laptop and a cup of tea she had not drunk. I had noticed her when she came in an hour before, because she had the quality the grief-stricken sometimes bring into a library, determined stillness, as though if she sat quietly enough in a public space she might pass unnoticed, even by herself. I did not know, not then, she was Isla's mother. I learned it afterward, from the librarian who handles our children's reading program, who knew the family. The mother's name was Claire. She had come in that day because the flat had become impossible, and she needed to be somewhere with other people, not somewhere she had to speak. She had been, our colleague told me later, as sealed as a room after a fire. Not cold, just closed. Every window latched from inside. She had not in 8 months been able to cry. She had told her GP she was worried about it. She had read 3 books about grief, and found them, as I said at the start, not quite sufficient. Isla did not know her mother was there. She found out later. She had not seen her come in. She was playing, I think, for herself, for him, for the version of the conversation that words had not been able to hold. The final passage was very quiet. The left hand slowed. The right hand let the melody simplify, note by note, back towards something you could almost call peace, not resolution. Nothing so tidy as that. A kind of arriving at a place where you could set the weight down for a moment and stand upright. One last phrase, searching and then finding, the way a question can find its own answer without the answer being the one you expected. And then silence. She sat with her hands still resting on the keys, not lifting them. The way you don't move, after saying the thing that needed saying. Case moving breaks it. Nobody spoke. The frost that had been forming around the room held for a long, still moment. At the back, Claire made a sound. A single involuntary sound, not loud, barely audible from where I stood, and put both hands over her face. The man beside the periodicals looked up, then looked quickly away, and gave her the privacy of not watching. The young woman at the study table looked down at her page. The boy on the chair settled back into his picture book, with the quiet gravity of a child who has witnessed something he will not be able to explain for years, but will not forget. I sat back down at the returns desk. I did not know what else to do with myself. Isla lowered the lid over the keys carefully, as though closing something that should be handled gently, picked up her bag from the floor, and walked to the window chair. She sat down and opened a book. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at anyone. After about 20 minutes, Claire got up from the Carol desk. She walked past the biography shelves and across the reading room toward the window, and she stopped behind Isla's chair and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Isla looked up. Neither of them said anything. Then Claire sat down in the chair opposite, and they stayed there together, side by side, in the way of 2 people who have just, after a long time, found their way into the same room. I did not approach them. That was not what was needed. What I will tell you is this. I have spent 34 years watching people come into this building, looking for something they cannot quite name, going to the shelves and searching through spines and titles as if the answer were filed somewhere under the right letter. I have always believed, and I still believe, that books can do extraordinary things. But that afternoon, in the corner of a reading room, an 11-year-old girl sat down at a piano that hadn't been played in 6 years, and she said the thing that none of us had been able to find under any letter in any catalog. She said it with her hands, in a language that didn't require translation, in a room full of strangers who listened the way people only listen when they recognize something that belongs to them. I had the piano tuned the following week. It has been played every Tuesday since.